Hello, good people of the Lower Susquehanna Synod. Welcome to Stressed and Depressed, Health, Hope, and Healing in Times of COVID. I am Debbie DeBrava, and I am not a reporter here to tell you about the news. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I'm here to discuss the news you already know about because you've been living it for over a year, and we're going to talk about the toll it's been taking on us. So I specialize in trauma-informed care and play therapy services for all ages and stages of life. I believe we are all fighting a hard battle, that we are all perfectly imperfect, and that kindness and mindfulness help us to heal when we are broken open by life. I have a private practice in York, although I've been doing exclusively telehealth services right here in my home since the pandemic began. Some housekeeping items for us today. This PowerPoint includes our main talking points, as well as quotes and references that inspire me. You should have received handouts ahead of time that maybe you printed. I think that would be helpful, or that you can at least access during our time together. You will also need some paper and something to write with. And a self-care caveat. This, and certainly any workshop, may contain ideas or experiences that evoke emotions, discomfort, or judgment in you. We all always have the right and the responsibility to take care of ourselves, including opting out of an activity. I want you to be as comfortable as possible wherever you are, and to stay as curious and compassionate as possible with yourself, with others, and with me, your humble presenter, throughout our time together. I certainly welcome your questions, your comments, and any aha moments you have during our follow-up Zoom time. You can also reach me at the contact information listed here privately anytime after the workshop. So let's put this workshop into a trauma-informed frame. First, what is trauma? So trauma is what happens when you're living your life, you're going about your business, and if you've caught the traumatic-filled Hamilton on Disney Plus, bam, the world turns upside down. And it's sudden, and it's terrifying, and it's out of your control, and you feel powerless, helpless, and perhaps hopeless. And your ordinary resources to manage threats are inadequate or tapped for this trauma. So this probably sounds all too familiar, right? As we know, March 11th, 2021 was the first anniversary of the collective trauma we know as the COVID-19 pandemic. And the body remembers trauma, the events leading up to it, the shock of it, the trying to make sense of it. It is possible that we may experience COVID anniversary trauma around this time of year, either consciously or unconsciously, for the rest of our lives. And as helpers, we don't have emotional distance with this trauma, since it is collective, affecting all of us. We are in it, having our own experience with it too. This pandemic is also complex. Complex trauma is not one solitary event that happens and then is done. The world turns upside down again and again and again, or keeps remaining upside down. Complex trauma is so ongoing, anticipated even, that the extraordinary becomes almost ordinary, like living with systemic racism or domestic violence. And while trauma of any kind is never, ever okay, it starts to feel normative after a while for the people living it day by day by day. COVID has claimed over 560,000 lives and sickened more than 30 million people in our country alone. And it's impacted our daily lives in so many ways. So while at first we might have thought, well, this will all be over soon, and I don't really know anyone with COVID yet, we now know we are in this for the long haul, and unfortunately, we all know someone, or maybe are someone included in those stats. Complex trauma creates exhaustion, hopelessness, and even numbing as we wonder, when will this ever end? With any trauma, you may also experience flashbulb memories in which you remember acutely the moment the world turned upside down. And if you live long enough, you collect collective trauma flashback memories of historical events. So in my lifetime, I remember where I was and what I was doing when TMI had a near meltdown. And my bus driver was afraid for us to open the windows. When the Columbine school shootings took place, when the planes flew into the Twin Towers, and when it truly sunk in with this pandemic that we are absolutely in scary times. So this picture is of my 7-year-old daughter, Gretchen, and this was shortly after the pandemic was declared. My husband and I were frequently getting her out of the house to go to a local park and just run and play, since we don't have any other kids in our home. Our 21-year-old lives on her own at this point. And one day we arrived at our local park and found caution tape was put up. And I remember thinking, wow, it's not even safe for my child to play on the playground. Yikes. So what about you? What do you remember? I invite you to think of a COVID flashbulb memory for you, a defining moment in the beginning of all of this. So when did you notice that the world turned upside down? So in your mind's eye, just picture where you were. Were you alone or not alone? Were you inside or outside? What were you thinking in this memory? What feelings called to your attention? And where did those feelings live in your body? What kind of body sensations went along with them? So just noticing your flashbulb memory in this moment. And I want to teach you a calming technique called butterfly hug. This can be used on your own or clinically in a session with a trauma-informed or EMDR-trained therapist like me. So butterfly hug is simply this. You take your arms, cross them over you, and tap on your arms back and forth like a butterfly is giving you a hug. All the while breathing in and breathing out. So just calming, grounding touch in this moment. This is bilateral stimulation, which is very healing. It's what happens during REM sleep when our left and right hemisphere are being activated. So wedding language processing with emotional processing, putting thoughts to words and feelings. It's very healing. It's also what we do when we rock a baby for soothing and comfort. So breathing in this moment, notice you're breathing in, breathing out, let go. And slowing down and stopping with your butterfly hug. You can also, by the way, tap on someone else. You can pat a cake on someone's legs, or my daughter Gretchen, when she falls asleep sometimes, asks me to tap and sing, Mommy. So with her back turned to me, I tap bilateral stimulation and sing my lullaby that I've made up for her on her back, just helping her soothe away the stress from her day. You can also, as self-care, do a finger tapping technique. So you need a 4-syllable mantra that can comfort you and ground you in this moment. My favorites are this. So follow me. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. Or this too shall pass. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. Yes. And check out in this moment this public safety message. Never would we have thought in the time before our COVID flashbulb memories that tips like these would become our commonly used daily superpower safety practices in the face of a deadly virus. And notice the trauma buzzwords that are present in this oh so friendly looking poster. So health and safety. The health and safety of the world continues to be at stake. That's trauma. Collective, complex, and even historical trauma. And COVID, like all trauma, reminds us of our vulnerability and powerlessness over being in a terrifying situation that's not of our choice. We live in a world right now where it makes absolute sense to teach our children that we are so vulnerable to getting sick that we need to say no thank you to shaking hands, to high fives, to hugs. Ironically, though, admitting our vulnerability is part of our survival. Fear teaches us to be careful, to learn from experience, to notice that we are under threat. And in response to that threat, to courageously do or not do that which is in our power and control. I'm holding duality. This and that are also key when we are making sense of the senselessness. So in my trauma work professionally and in my life personally, I often hold duality. We as helpers do that all the time. So in this moment, we can be terrified and we can do what we need to do, both. We can grieve and be grateful for the love and the comfort that's present in this moment. People can hurt each other in awful ways, and we can tell our stories. We can hold these people accountable, and we can advocate for change in the world and with broken systems. Yes. And yet are also powerful 3-letter words in addition to the word and. Since control is often an illusion, especially in the face of trauma, it can be empowering to know what is in our control, our actions, our thoughts, our responses, to reframe our thoughts from obligatory I have to energy to I get to energy. I get to validates the needs that possibly are being met somewhere in the choices we are willing and able to make, even if maybe we don't truly want to make them or if they are inconvenient to do. And if we truly aren't at least willing to do something, that's a red flag to pay attention to. And that's a whole other discussion or therapy session to be had. So in this moment, walk with me. Instead of, I have to wear a mask, it becomes, I get to wear a mask so I can protect myself and others. Instead of, I have to teach my daughter at home, it becomes, I get to keep her safe. I get to have a bird's eye view of how she's functioning as a learner in the world. And I get to appreciate teachers even more than I already did. Yes. And yet can be tacked onto anything that is not in our power yet to do or to learn. But we need to hope absolutely that it will someday. So I can't hug my mother yet. I can't take that European vacation yet. I can't find an answer to this problem yet. Yes. So let's look at the duality you have been juggling in this pandemic. I need you to take a piece of paper out and something to write with. And instead of looking at what's on your plate, we're going to look at what's been on your pandemic placemat. So taking a piece of paper and folding it in half and then unfolding it, or simply putting a line down your paper if it's in a notebook. We're going to look at stressors and blessings. So on one side, list your stressors. So this can include kind of roles that you juggle, responsibilities, stressors, worries that you've had in this pandemic. It can include traumas and losses that you unfortunately have suffered in this past year, or things you've been afraid of missing out on. It can also be things that you actively miss or things that you can't do yet. And then on the other side, what are your blessings? What has brought you comfort and joy, which is what attachment is all about, comfort and joy? Where have you found gratitude, or where has God shown up? What are your God moments? Where do you find hope, inspiration, meaning, purpose in all of this? And the purpose doesn't have to be the think positive and everything happens for a reason kind of purpose. It's the meaning that you find in the eye of the storm, despite the trauma. Trauma's never okay. And what are the things you don't miss from life before COVID? So for me, I don't miss wearing a watch. I don't miss ironing my outfit. I don't miss driving to work. But I do, on the other hand, I do miss going to a movie, that collective experience. And I miss quiet, alone moments that I don't have enough of because my daughter is home all the time and we don't have childcare anymore. So think through this, sit with this. And you are also going to be welcome to keep working on this as we move through the presentation. And if you're not finished when I'm done with this, you can also keep working on it in our Zoom. But really write out pictures and words or both, your stressors and your blessings. And now we get to look with a broad brushstroke right now of how we, the people of the United States, are collectively doing in this pandemic. So there's a lot of statistics out there that you can access about our social and our emotional functioning. This is a compilation of themes that emerged from me as I look at the data and from my own personal and professional experiences. So let's look at this together, and you may also keep working on your pandemic placemats while I talk. So within our hearts and with our homes, we are juggling work and home demands, things that you're finding and putting on your placemat. So we've always been a busy culture, and then COVID's tasked us to juggle our work and home demands in really creative ways and within very restrictive and varying ways of how we can operate safely within our world, within our community, within our places of business. Some of us have needed to reinvent how we work, how we learn. I converted my entire practice to an at-home telehealth practice in the first 2 weeks of this pandemic. And I've watched my husband, who is a pastor, continue to figure out with his coworkers how best to safely meet the needs of our congregation. And God bless essential workers from the medical staff to grocery store clerks who are called to show up while others are sheltering in place. And financially, we are in need of stimulus. Our government has acknowledged twice now with stimulus checks that we're struggling. We all know businesses that are closed, people who are trying to make ends meet on unemployment, families who can't access affordable and available childcare, and who are facing food insecurity in our country. And yes, screens have saved the day in so many ways, from remote learning and worshiping. And yet there are real limitations and challenges, as we know, to adjusting to these new ways of being. And we miss each other. We miss being in person. So on a daily basis, we're all doing a very personal and subjective cost-benefit analysis of how we choose to live our lives in times of COVID. What risk are we willing to take today in this moment? What are we afraid of missing out on? And how do we judge others for the choices they are making that might look different from our choices? We also feel socially isolated versus overwhelmed, depending on your life, depending on your pod. So if you live alone, you might feel really disconnected from the world, except for virtual experiences, perhaps. And within our pod, it's a lot of togetherness as we bounce off the same people over and over again, which can really put stress on already stressed out or even abusive family systems or relationships. And I worry a lot about that. And we are grieving, actually and ambiguously. COVID is now the leading cause of death in America, with roughly 20% of those deaths from our elderly and long-term care residents. And this grief has been complicated by denial by some as to the severity or even the existence of COVID, and by limited ability for families to provide comfort to or grief or goodbye to their loved ones, or to publicly mourn them in their grief. And we are also grieving ambiguously our ways of being in the world. So Gen Z teenagers have needed to say goodbye to rites of passages like proms and graduations and going away to college. And we're worried. We're worried about our health, our mental health, our physical health around COVID, its long-term impact on our lives. We're gaining weight, or the COVID-19, as some people say, and substance use is on the rise as we try to cope with the stress of this ongoing pandemic. So overall, yeah, it makes sense. We are COVID weary and emotionally exhausted. Absolutely. And also, so I wanted to add and also, with the lesson of being out and about in the world, less driving in our world, we are way into nesting in our homes. And this has been good for our planet. And this has been good for Home Depot. It's also been good for pet adoptions, which have been significantly on the rise. We added a hamster and a window seat to our pod since this pandemic. And within our communities, we are witnessing political turmoil, racial trauma, and social unrest. From police brutality to the storming of our Capitol, we are in traumatic times. Recent headline ripped from the news in USA Today reported mass shootings hit a record high in 2020. Can COVID-19 vaccine bring peace in 2021? One ray of hope for me was the youngest inaugural poet, Amanda Gorman, hearing her say and challenging us to be advocates of change in the world, that the norms and notions of what just isn't always justice. Yes. And while we are suffering collectively, COVID has absolutely disproportionately affected minorities, and it's added to existing health disparities for people of color that were already there due to issues with housing and income and education. And we're worried about our children. Are they falling behind? How do we balance screen time in a world of remote learning? Will this impact them long term? How do we keep our elderly and our sick safe? Will our economy and businesses be okay and bounce back? Will we ever return to normal? And the truth is, we don't have these answers yet. What we do know is this pandemic is affecting us now and has been affecting us. And APA reports that we are in a national mental health crisis. Anxiety, depression, substance use, and suicidal ideation are on the rise. So yes, we are stressed and depressed, and that makes sense. And we humans are connected even when we feel alone, resilient by nature and hopefully nurture, and full of hope even in the darkest of times. Fred Rogers' mom told him as a child to look for the helpers in traumatic times, and she was right. Resilience is built in our support systems. We need each other to survive and to thrive post-trauma. Being in relationship with ourselves and others and with God is how we heal and how we find hope in the eye of the storm. So how can we help? Here are some ways to find help or resources. If you or someone you know is in a mental health crisis, which in my world is defined as being a threat to yourself or others, call 911 or crisis intervention, which is county-based, or go to the local emergency room where crisis intervention can assess. If you need mental health resources, there's lots of resources online, but here's a recent website that I found and wannatalkaboutit.com. And if you or someone you need is looking for a therapist or a psychiatrist, Psychology Today is a great resource where you can screen for a lot of different variables and clinicians in your area. I'm on there and it's a great resource. So, how are you doing? We helpers truly cannot be of service to anyone unless we are being mindful of our own pain and how it's affecting us. I love this quote. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. This picture shows my daughter on the same day when the park was closed with caution tape, and I found her meditating. And that's when I knew we are in scary times, and just maybe we are also going to be okay, at least in this moment. So I want to know about your pain, what stress looks like for you. Think in this moment, and please take the time to write down 3 ways you know when you are stressed or depressed. What are your signs? What are your symptoms? Or what do people tell you are the signs and symptoms when you're stressed or depressed? What's reflected back to you? And there's 2 handouts that give you some ideas and ways to assess for trauma. One is the trauma reaction cards checklist. I use this in my office with kids, but you can use it for all ages. And this is also a vicarious traumatization survey that you can take and see how you're doing in all of this. Here is a trauma poem that I want to read to you. Roses are red. Trauma is true. You are amazing doing the work that you do. Yes. And also, trauma work profoundly affects us. Trauma's loss. Nothing is ever the same. And being a helper is a privilege and a burden with lots of occupational hazards, compassion fatigue, burnout, vicarious trauma. So we need to take care of ourselves. Self-care is not selfish. It's essential. And now more than ever, you are needed. So you need to practice the ABCs of self-care, being aware and tuned in, seeking balance whenever possible, and being connected to yourself, to others, communicating your needs. These are all critical. And connecting with peers is a particular way to take care of yourself as a helper. So why is it critical that you get a self-care plan if you don't have one yet? As we close, repeat after me, please. Because I hurt, because I matter, because the people I serve matter, because the work I do matters, because the profession matters, because I must. Yes. Here are some self-care assessments and ideas for you. The first one is a great tool that you can get ideas from and assess different domains, similar to number 4, the wholeness wheel put out by the ELCA. There are also some ideas of simple things you can do on the job to take care of you, and also ways to add comfort and play and joy to your life. We all need those ideas. And I also want you to write down one personal and one professional self-care goal or practice you get to commit to beyond our time together. So make it doable, make it concrete, and you can keep thinking about this as we transition into our Zoom, but I really want you to put it in writing. One personal, one professional self-care goal. There really is no greater investment than you. And some closing wishes in these uncertain times. This is a video of a story that I wrote for my daughter in this pandemic after she made a birthday wish that she wished to be able to hug all the people she loves. I wish for you that you may find post-traumatic growth. I wish that you may find grace for yourself and all those who provide shelter in your life. And may you find gratitude for the love that is around you and in you. And if the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will truly be enough. So, thank you. Peace be with you. Take care of you so you can serve others. And I will see you in our Zoom. Thank you.